Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is the last webinar of our DEI in Curling Summit. I'm Sara Carlsson from the Global Initiative of DEI in Curling. And with me, I have Raju, who's one of our co-founders. The purpose of forming the Global DEI in Curling was for us to be able to share resources and knowledge between curling organizations who want to make curling a more inclusive space. And so this is our final webinar of the day, and it's a youth panel. And I'm really glad to have all of you guys here, both from the Global Curling DEI, but also for my own job as a development officer for Swedish Curling, where I am actually one of the people in charge of developing curling for youth in our country. So I'm hoping that there are more people who have jobs like mine listening, so that we can learn from you guys and work together to make some change. So we are going to just start with a round of introductions. So please, for all the panelists, you can tell us a little bit about who you are, what's your role within curling, and if you'd also like to share what you think is the most important topic that you would like to talk about in a panel discussion like this. So we're going to start in Sweden with Sofie Bergman. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, so my name's Sofie, and I'm 21 years old. Originally, I'm from Östersund, which is a town in the north. But right now I live in Gothenburg, which is in the south. So I'm still a competitive curler, but I'm also a part of a development group, I could say, for youths between 17 and 30. So we're working a lot with development and how to basically keep people within the sport after their junior years, because we think that for me it started with I was just seeing a lot of people dropping out when they graduated high school and ended their junior year. So that's kind of what that group came from. And for me, that's kind of the question closest to my heart as well, how to keep people within the sport, both competitive, but also just for development and just for fun, really. So that's who I am.
Thank you. And Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm 20 years old, and I'm a student at Laurentian University. I started curling 7 or 8 years ago, and I play competitively, but I also volunteer within our Little Rocks programs and youth development programs at our curling clubs. I would like to see the sport grow at the grassroots, because in an aging demographic, there aren't a whole lot of newcomers to the sport, which is really sad to see. So I would like to talk about how we can get those young people interested and how we can start at the grassroots and then retain them through their junior years and upwards to adult curling, because there's so much room with so many different national and world championships, so many different levels of play that you can play in, and it's sad to see the numbers dwindling in such a fun sport.
Thank you, Abby. So next we have Jakob, Hanna.
Cool. Hi, guys. My name is Jacob. I am 19 years old, and I've been curling since 8th grade. Fun fact, I started curling because my PE teacher, who is also now my coach, got me to try the sport out, and ever since then, it's kind of stuck. I've been curling competitively, more seriously, for the last 3 or 4 years, and other than that, I also work I work ideally in the board of the club as internal and external curling competition manager. And one of the questions that I am really passionate about is I would like you, Abby, to see more people in the sport, but on a bit of another perspective, I'd like to see more diversity in the sport. I feel like coming from my background and looking at my situation and seeing Sweden, which is the curling scene that I've grown up in, it's been pretty homogeneously white. And it can at sometimes be difficult seeing that you have a different background and there isn't as many factors that you can relate to when you start. And I think it makes it difficult for people to stick. And unfortunately, I've seen juniors of other backgrounds not stick around for as terribly as long as other juniors might. So I'd like to see the sport become more welcoming for everybody, regardless of their circumstances or their background. I really want to cement that curling is a sport for everyone. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Great, thank you. And we're also going to say Jacob then, because that's what you said. And so next we have Tyler Powell.
Yeah, my name is Tyler Powell. I'm 20 years old. I live in Calgary, Alberta. Kind of involved in curling in a lot of different aspects. I play mainly mixed doubles right now, just because that's, I don't know, kind of what interests me the most and kind of what I want to focus on. And I'm also involved in curling as a rocks and rings instructor. So I go into the schools and try and get the kids excited about curling. I also teach with Curling Alberta has a new program called Ready to Rock, and it's aimed to get diverse communities and underrepresented communities in curling into the sport. And they run tried events for kids that have never tried it before. They can give curling a go, and it's ran for free. It's funded by the member association, and then I also work for Gold Lion Curling as well. So also on I'm on the board of a Calgary Youth Curling Association. I run a camp every year. Again, youth curling oriented, trying to get kids that are not new to the game, but kids that have maybe played for 2 or 3 years. Try and teach them a little bit more about the game, and key is that they're having fun. For me, what I would like to see is I'd like to see just more youth involved with the sport. I feel like curling has a big image problem. I know that it does because when I was in elementary school, high school, I still experience it every now and again. People say, and a lot of my friends don't curl, they kind of make fun of it or joke around a little bit about it. I would like to see. I think it needs to. We need to focus on really promoting the athleticism and kind of the social aspects of the sport to try and get people that maybe have a different background, whether it be soccer or another sport, to try and pick up curling and slowly try and change that image that it is athletic and that it does require people working out in the gym and all that to be good at it. So.
Thank you. And we also have Tyler Smith. Welcome.
Hello, my name's Tyler Smith. I'm from Sudbury, which is up in Northern Ontario. I'm in the same spot as Abby. I'm 17 and in my last year of high school. And I'm involved with curling. Well, historically, I've been a competitive curler a little bit, taking it a little bit easier this year with it being last year of high school. But I've played competitively for, I guess, 4 or 5 years, and I've curled for 9. And I'm also involved with the Northern Ontario Curling Association's new youth advisory committee, where we've done work on advising the Northern Ontario Curling Association board on the positions of youth in our region. And I think the topic that I think I'd like to tackle sort of the most is having more youth playing the sport for fun. Like there's a lot of we've got youth programs that in our clubs, but a lot of them are focused on making competitive curlers, which of course is still something that needs to be done. You still want to be competitive in the sport, but there's not really like a house league option, I find, for youth curlers, and I think that's something that would help sort of bring out the social aspects of the sport, and something that a group of friends would be more be more likely to get sort of a group of friends to go out and try curling.
You're muted, Sara.
Thank you. Thanks. I was just saying, like, I would love to stay there a little bit with you, Tyler, on having more youth just stay in curling for the social side. Just a bit of background, like, I don't know if you can give the insights in Canada, but we have something called the Youth Barometer in Sweden, where young people are asked like a million questions about what they want to do in their spare time. And basically, when it comes to participation in sport, competing is ranked almost at the bottom. And at the same time, we have sports that is completely built around training for competition. So I was just wondering, like, your thoughts about that. If you want to grow the social side of curling for youth, like how do we do that?
Well, so I don't know anything similar to that sort of that youth parameter that like in like an equivalent of that in Canada, but I think that's interesting to take a look at the fact that competition does rank at the bottom of that sort of scale of what's most important to youth in sport, and I think that's part of the issue, like that there's not really an advertised league just for youth, like a lot of times. So I know, like personally, it's either we go to or like when I was a little bit younger, like 13, 14, for anything youth related, it was sort of Sundays, not Little Rocks, but like competition development sort of thing. There wasn't really a league involved with that as much. It was more training and drills, and you'd pair off into games later, but it wasn't the sort of thing where you could walk in with no experience and just sort of have fun. Like I know for at the adult level, there's social leagues where you play whatever 4 or 6 ends and then get off the ice and have some food and drinks, and it's more of a centered around having a good time, and there's not really that same equivalent in the youth space. And I don't think that the youth really they see it's an adult league, and that sort of scares them away a little bit. So if there was that option, like sort of like I said, like a house league sort of option for youth curlers, or like a teen drop-in night sort of thing where people get paired off and play games that way, I think that might be something that interests people for sure.
I think that's a really good idea. So Tyler, Powell, you seem to do a lot of work within curling. It's just not the one thing that where you are engaged, but you said that you do work with this program within Alberta to try and get kids excited to curling and also to start. Like, do you have the social part as a side of it, or how do you go from the try curling to the start curling?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I feel like there's a little bit of a slight disconnect, like from my experience, teaching the rocks and rings, like there's almost like not, I don't know if you guys have seen it in the gyms before, but there's almost not one kid that like isn't into it or isn't interested. But I feel like when we bring them out onto ice, it sometimes that's when we tend to lose them. And I think the reason for that is because when we bring them onto ice, I think the focus needs to be entirely on fun, instead of, I think some junior programs have a tendency to get too technical too fast. Like, oh, you have to have your shoulder in a certain position right away, and I feel like that's where we lose the kids. I feel like if the focus has to be on fun, and the ones that want to take it more seriously will they'll identify. You'll be able to identify them, and they'll identify themselves. But in terms of the social, I think the kids, once they start playing games and whatnot, that's probably one of their favorite parts, is being able to play with their friends and whatnot. So.
Yeah, thank you. Let's Sofie. So you're doing work in Sweden more to then keep the curlers who are going from juniors to seniors. Do you see like a connection here?
Yeah, definitely. I think that because we work a lot with the transition into or after their junior years, and I think that a lot of many of the reasons why people stop is because it gets too serious, or it gets like too expensive, or people don't really find the motivation to stay within the sport when it got like university and just adulthood knocking at the door. So I think it's just, as kids, I think it's really important to just keep the fun to it, because I think that's a big key. Because I mean, the ones that want to compete at a high level will probably stick around within the sport, but the ones that might not have as much of a competition feeling to it, or doesn't want to compete at such a high level, might drop out because it's hard to stay within the sport and just play for fun, and not play with just a lot of older people. Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit more about the group that you are working with right now?
Yeah, for sure. So like last winter, I basically got a call from a friend called Hans, and we were chatting a bit and talking about how it's very sad that we see this kind of trend in Sweden where, just as in many other sports, a lot of people, as I said, they quit after their junior years, and we felt that it was kind of a gap of things to be done there. So we wanted to just enlighten those problem and think a lot about how we could prevent them, because we thought that we've been talking a lot how it's important to be felt like seen and heard, to stay within the sport, and also just to create abilities to actually compete within Sweden. So as the situation is now, there isn't a lot of competitions for like elite competitions and or just any competition for young adults in Sweden. So you kind of have to travel abroad, which gets and it gets kind of expensive. So we want to bring back some competitions to Sweden, and also just create an environment where curling is fun and something that you can keep on doing, whether it's at an elite level or just for fun. So yeah.
So talking about competitions, and also you guys, like, feel free if you really want to jump in on something that someone else has said, like, then just do that. But Jacob, you and I chatted a bit earlier, and you also have a lot of thoughts about competitions. So anything you'd like to share right now?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I just wanted to say that I definitely agree with what you were saying earlier, Tyler, about like keeping the kids on the ice. I think it's super important. I mean, kids at that age, like what we're talking, like 8 to 12, 13, spend a lot of time in school, and a lot of their life is centered around school and their friends they have at school. So I think making the ice or making the practice as distanced from that as possible, and making it more of like a trip to the park or like something of the sorts that they naturally would disassociate with the school environment, would make it better. I mean, as you're saying, not making it as technical, but just making it more of a fun experience and kind of distancing the focus of having to perform. It's like you just want to be there and you want to have a great time. So I definitely agree with you that like that's usually where you lose the kids, but it would be really, really great if you could just focus on making it as much of recess as possible. But when it comes to competitions, I think it's difficult to say because we all come from different perspectives, and we're from different aspects of the curling scene in general, geographically, and like wherever we may be. But I think in general, it needs to become more like easier to compete, me personally, I find it really, really difficult to know where to like throw myself at, like what competitions to start, what competition is reasonable for me, where can I get like a reasonable butt kicking from where I learned something and not just feel completely defeated from when I'm out on the scene. Because I think, I mean, you shouldn't be afraid of taking a loss, but at a certain extent, a loss becomes so hard that you really can't learn from it. So I think generally, regardless of where you are geographically or what circumstances there may be, it should be a lot easier to understand what a competition may give you and at what level it is, just so that it becomes more inviting. And the more clear the type of competition is, the easier it is to organize if you just want to put together an NE4 team, or if you want to go with your normal men's team or your normal mixed doubles team. And also, I think the more the merrier. Of course, keeping quality, but just speaking from a Swedish perspective, competitions here within our nation's borders are so rare. So I'd like to see a lot more competitions, and whenever those are in place, I'd like to see them have a pretty clear purpose. And I think it would make it much more inviting for curlers at different levels to actually decide and plan to do something. That way you can have an NE4 team traveling to a neighboring city, or an elite team just planning their season.
Just a question, do you think that there should be like a ranking of competitions, or just can you
Yeah, sure. I think a ranking might be good, assuming that there are a sufficient amount of competitions to actually place in a ranking hierarchy. But I think it definitely could be beneficial on a macro and a micro scale. As we spoke earlier, Sara, like I thought it would be like looking at like a world stage. Like how I thought curling worked would be more similar to other sports, that where you have a regional tour that expands to a world tour, and then those final steps would be worlds or different championships, or maybe like at the top you'd have the Olympics. But I don't really feel like that type of natural growth staircase exists to the same extent within curling, and that makes it kind of difficult to know where to go. Just based on own experience from season planning and just looking at the World Curling Tour's website and just being overwhelmed by the myriad of competitions. And the only thing that sets them apart is the amount of WCT points that you could get. But there is so much more than just that parameter and that variable. There's so many competitions that when you speak to curlers, you understand have a long history, has a certain type of culture, has a certain type of demographic that's drawn to it. And having that more stated into or more clear, I think would be beneficial.
Great, thank you. Abby, I wanted to ask you a bit more about like your engagement with the Youth Advisory Committee. I know that you're on one as well. So Tyler and Tyler, you're both on committees like this. But Abby, tell us like what's the purpose of the committee? Like, how do you work with the board? Like, what issues are you working about? What responsibilities are you being given? Can you just tell us a bit more?
So the Northern Ontario Curling Association's Youth Advisory Committee is an advisory body geared at making recommendations to the NOCA and providing insight from a Gen Z perspective about how to develop the sport and how to retain members. In our particular group, we've designated 3 areas. So we have schools and recreational, marketing, and competition. So we've split ourselves off and sort of focused in on certain areas and how do we grow the sport and how do we retain in those areas and what needs to be done, because as much as our sport is great, there needs to be some changes to the marketing in particular as time goes on and social media is more prominent and kids' interests have changed. So we are geared towards trying to hit those developmental points and figure out what needs to be done to make the sport as a whole better. And to add on to what Tyler Smith said about make fun leagues, I don't know if you've heard about it, but locally in Sudbury we have a new league started where it's a 4-end drop-in game. So you don't have to go every week, and every week you have a team scramble. So you show up and you play with new people and get to meet all kinds of new people. And I think that that's a wonderful idea at the grassroots, because for those kids who want to do something recess like or something fun, then you get to meet new people every week and play.
So how are you finding it, like entering into a committee like this? It mostly, like, I see Simon is asking this question, and I want to ask you, like, it's mostly surrounded by adults, and you are trying to provide like guidance and advice and have a voice in this space. What's that been like for you?
It's certainly interesting. We have, our committee isn't a governing body, it's more of an advisory capacity. And everybody has been very welcoming. I think I can speak for both Tyler, Smith, and I. Everybody has welcomed our opinions with open arms and like to hear from us. And I think that it is important that we make the sport inclusive in the age demographic as well as everything else, because a lot of the decisions that are being made are impacting youth curling at a recreational and competitive standpoint. And it's important that we have the say in it if we want to retain young people throughout juniors and onwards.
Thank you. Tyler, Powell, you're on a similar group in Alberta. Could you sort of answer the same questions? Like, what are you, how are you structured, and what's that like for you to be in that space as a young curler?
Yeah, well, we're still kind of in the I guess the beta phases, you could call it, of our panel. So we have kind of developed, terms of reference and whatnot for how we're going to go about what we're doing. But we have been consulted by the member association on a few different issues kind of pertaining to youth curling, and we will actually, part of the reason the panel is there is we will be consulted on all the issues, which I think is pretty huge going forward, all the issues pertaining to youth curling anyway. So it depends on, I mean, obviously we don't have the final say as to what the board is going to make a decision on, but they have the ability to listen to what we have to say before we before they implement a decision. Have we been accepted well by adults? I would say we have. I think in curling, in the kind of the way curling has always been, as there's been, I don't necessarily know if youth have ever, I think actually that youth having a voice in curling is something that's actually relatively new and hasn't really happened before. I don't know if, I could be incorrect, but I think it's a very recent thing where like within the last 5 years or so that youth have actually had a say in any decisions surrounding curling. So I think we're on the right track, that youth representation is increasing, but I think there might be a little bit of a kind of natural, I don't know, like aura in the sport to maybe not necessarily listen to what kids have to say, because we are, I guess, relatively inexperienced, but I think kids like relatively inexperienced in the sport compared to maybe some people that have been playing the sport for 30 years, but I think it's getting better.
That's good to hear. So, Jacob, going back to you, like the other panelists are all sort of part of groups that have the purpose of being youth voices, but you are more like a young voice in a regular board. Could you just like reflect a little bit on like that experience for you?
Yeah, sure. I think I'd like to start off with a little prerequisite saying that I feel like I've been really fortunate with the board that I am on. When I first was selected to become, my first position was internal competition manager. It kind of felt a little intimidating to some extent because I'd say the group consisted mainly of older men, and it feels like the structure is very, how should I say, as I expected it to be, with a lot of older adults, not necessarily stuck in their old ways, but that have had a particular way of working or have had a way that they always do stuff, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just comes from a lot of experience in doing something so often that you develop your own means and your own ways and what you think is the most efficient and what you think is going to bring you from point A to point B in the most efficient manner. So I definitely think being a bit younger, not having as much experience and looking at stuff from kind of a bit of uh, perhaps a rookie, I would say, a rookie standpoint and a younger standpoint makes me maybe ask a couple of questions that might be redundant to some, but would not have been asked would I not have been there. Because like I want to understand the structure that's so inherently clear to them. And asking those questions sometimes could get people to question, well, why are we doing this, or why can we not do that, and what has caused that decision? Because when you do something for such a long time, you kind of normalize things because it's just always been that way. And I think having people of different experiences and of different ages and who have different perspectives when looking at the sport does bring different things to light. And I think it also brings a bit of a youthful vitality to it all. It kind of pushes and has some energy to it and causes some, I don't know, just a bit of an energy surge. And it makes it easier to like discuss, like engage people, I feel like.
Yeah. Also, like talking about curling being predominantly like very white and not necessarily very diverse in Sweden. Like, how is that conversation within your club and within your board? What do you talk about and how?
I don't think diversity hasn't really been a topic that we touch on, to be quite honest. Me personally, I'm very extroverted as a person. I don't have any issues, as may be evident, with talking, and I take a lot of space, and I don't let factors that make me different hinder me. I use that as a strength, and I don't that may not be the same for other individuals. So sometimes I can feel like I kind of have a moral obligation to speak up, even if it is something that does not pertain to me, just to make sure that a certain thing is said. But I don't really feel like it has been a hindrance or necessarily an advantage. I just feel like we're all dealt with and care for each other in the same particular way you would to another peer, to another human being. So I've had really good experiences. Sometimes, I mean, being out in competitions, meeting some older, more narrowly minded people. There, of course, will be some obstacles along the way. I'm not gonna lie about that. I've had my a fair share of a couple of situations, but it's nothing I take too close to heart. But I do think it is very important to get past not seeing color, because not seeing color is a part of the issue. Because if we don't acknowledge there being a difference, then we can actually work around ensuring that those differences are not actually hindrances for some people. Because I think when you have a privilege in society, being white or being male or be whatever that may be in your advantage, it's super easy to just assume that everybody has that same advantage, and it can be really difficult to find that empathy within you and understand that some stuff that comes so naturally to you is actually difficult for someone else. So I think I've had a really, really good experience. I don't feel like my background has hindered me in some sort of way, but I would like to see the discussion grow, and I would like to see people asking uncomfortable questions, because we have a really heavy, I'm not sure how it goes in Canada, and it's probably different in different regions, but we have a very heavy political correctness wave that's kind of deafening all discussions here in Sweden. And it makes it really difficult to ask those questions because people are so afraid to come across as offensive that the status quo is really never challenged in any sort of way. So I really like to invite to those questions. I really like for people to ask because it's so important that you get to ask those questions and that you are able to sympathize and find that empathy and go past beyond not seeing color and actually seeing issues, acknowledging issues, and then being able to make sure that whatever is causing these issues just not make room for any of that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to add or comment? Like Tyler Smith from Northern Ontario, is this a conversation that you have like within your regional association or club as well?
It's not really something that's come up, but I certainly agree that it's something that should make the change to come up. I obviously can't say it more eloquently than it just was. But yeah, it's something that hasn't really taken a forefront yet. I know there are initiatives like Gold Line released a series of brooms with different wrappings on them to sort of acknowledge different ethnicities and perhaps give them further level of comfort in playing the sport. But it's something that's not really discussed as much as it should be. A lot of the focus is on increasing numbers in general, not increasing numbers in a specific in a specific ethnicity or background or any of those sort of things. So I think once it's something that needs to come up, but it hasn't quite gotten to the forefront yet.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people here aren't even aware of. They don't even see it as an issue. A lot of people here, which is a little bit troubling. I was in Chestermere at the Grand Slam a couple weekends ago, and I remember a conversation had with a woman who didn't think that a black person could have a different experience in a curling club than a white person. She thought that they would be, I guess, equally welcomed when they come into the curling club. And we know from the people we've talked to that come from the BIPOC community that simply isn't the case. They experience maybe microaggressions or certain they might not be welcome the same way in the curling club as a white person is. And I think even like a big thing would be just making people aware that that's a thing. Like a lot of people I know first of all, they don't even want to talk about it. Second of all, they're not even aware that it's an issue.
So just staying with you on that, Tyler, Powell, like how do you think that the young voices within curling can be a part of raising this question and the conversation?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's more a kind of issue of ally, like being strong allies and kind of having the uncomfortable conversation maybe in the lounge after the game that, hey, this is maybe someone's experience or just talking about it. Like there's kind of, at least in Canada, it's kind of a cultural thing that it's race is something you don't talk about, and in order to combat systemic racism, systemic discrimination, it just talking about it is, I think, the biggest thing, because a lot of people don't like to even talk about it. So
I also think it's really important, just as Abby and Tyler does when they are around at schools and stuff, and to try to bring other people into the sport, because at least in Sweden, curling is kind of seen as a family sport. A lot of people that play comes from a family who has or knows someone that does play, and I think it's very easy that we just stay in the same lanes basically. So I think it's really important to just be out there, and as you said, Tyler, before, just to try not just looking at getting people to stay within the sport and getting everyone into the sport, which is also important, but maybe try to focus a bit on different areas of the city, or just to get like diversity within our sport. I think that's super important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think something that's also really important, I really find your work interesting, you guys, as you mentioned that you go out into different schools, because I think one part that's really important to mention is that we, like me, being a person of color with origin from the Middle East, like winter sports don't come as naturally. I didn't really exist in those circumstances when I was young. Like just in comparison to you, Sofie, I know you're from Östersund, which is like our winter sport capital here in Sweden, where it's so natural to just put on your skis and just go out and have a day, or like ski on like an icy lake. Like that's like those circumstances were never something that like I was in. I know the first time I went skiing was also the first time that my father went skiing, and we kind of had those firsts together. So I think reaching out into forums where you can reach people equally, where there is no socioeconomic barrier to some extent, like schools in different areas, or making sure that you reach forums that involve a multitude of people groups, where all demographics are welcome and all demographics frequent, is super, super important, because it's not as natural for one to find themselves in that type of situation if you are BIPOC or within any other type of demographic. And I think, speaking from a Swedish perspective, like you were saying, Sofie, it's very curling is something you inherit here. Like if you look at the best teams that we have here in Sweden, a large majority of our best players have curling within the family. So it was natural for their parents to bring into the rink. And of course, it's going to stick because it's within the family and it's been for so many generations. And that's not something that I personally had. I know Agnes Knochenhauer, second of Hasselborg, didn't have anyone within her family play curling, and that's a rarity, but that's something I find pretty interesting and very inspiring, because she kind of found her own niche and stuck to it. And I think it takes a lot to be able to do that, because me personally, because I don't see myself or my type of, not my people necessarily, but people that I can relate to be represented, it would, statistically speaking, make it more difficult to stick to the sport, because there are less factors to be able to relate to. Also, because the sport is very homogenous, it makes it difficult for other people to stay, because you associate one type of person with the sport. And if you're not in line with that type of person, or you don't particularly like hanging out with that type of people, you'll immediately just decide to not disassociate yourself with it and remove yourself from that narrative, because you just know that you won't be able to click with that type of people. So having a diverse spectrum of people playing is also going to end with a lot more people staying in the sport, because it gives so many new perceptions of what the sport is, and it's going to make people stick. You're mute again, Sara.
So just having difficulties finding the right button here. So like, I'm just going to be really selfish and then ask a question then from my point of view as actually employed by a curling organization. What should I do, like when I go to work, to help change this image of curling? Like, what's your advice for me? Jacob, I'll start with you because you were the last speaker on the topic.
Staying on the diversity theme, I'm assuming. Yes. I think that's a very difficult question to tackle. I think there are so many aspects to it. I know you're doing a lot of work with, or Swedish Curling is doing a lot of work with Fritidsbanken and promoting floor curling and reaching out to schools and trying to get people to understand and learn what curling is, because it's not very common knowledge here in Sweden, at least, for kids to know what curling is. So the very lack of representation. I mean, we get the eventual surge every 4 years with the Olympics, but it doesn't necessarily reach children. But yeah, I think it's super important to get out into schools and focus on a multitude of schools with different socioeconomic backgrounds. I think that's super, super important. I think it also is important to have a larger media presence, just so that curling is all like pops up in someone's mind more naturally, just the way football would or soccer would, because it's just always there. We're always, that when people talk about sports, they're always going to gravitate to hockey, or they're always going to gravitate to football. And I know that's because of how large those sports are, but I think just having a better media presence, almost like just like seeing a catchy commercial on TV, can make it stick whether you like it or not. So I think that is super, super important. I also feel like we should, a really important thing would be seeing representation. Like if someone reaches out to me, a person of similar background as myself, and encourages me to curl, I might find that as a more interesting offer than a white person who I necessarily don't have as many factors to relate to be quite frank. So I think that's super, super important, and maybe even have that kind of diversity in language. I know in Sweden, we had a pretty big refugee wave coming in 2015 and still going on, with Arabic being the second largest language here in Sweden now, with every 10th person here speaking it. So it would be really good to kind of have that diversity, maybe have people speaking the language, and even go out and say that, hey, we're going to have this thing, we're going to focus on people with different backgrounds, so that we actually invite that type of people. Because sometimes events that just are open to everyone don't seem as welcoming for BIPOC people, even though they are. So those are things I definitely would do.
Yeah, thank you. Just maybe to translate what Fritidsbanken would translate to the leisure bank is a place where you can go and borrow pre-used sports and leisure equipment for free. So most of them, or a whole bunch of them now, also have floor curling that they lend to schools. But talking a lot about talking a lot about then the image of curling, and also like Abby, you talked in the beginning about growing the grassroots. Like, how do you think the image of curling affects this, and what would you like to see?
So kind of as going along with the trail conversation, I got into curling because my dad curls. So I came from that same background. But for my first few years, it took me a while to grasp it, because it was still the sport my dad played, and I just did it to have something to do on Sunday mornings. But it took me a while to develop I like this and I want to keep doing it, and I'm doing it because I like it, and get around the stigma of, it's just a sport that my dad plays. And so I think that we need to start marketing how youth can be involved in it, and that youth are involved in it. Because if you show them that there's a place for them to get into a sport, like having leagues, as Tyler Smith mentioned, that invite young people to participate, or maybe growing our presence on social media. One of the more prominent apps nowadays is TikTok, and that one is unique because it reaches people that are not necessarily following the page or organization that's posting. Any video can go viral, and I've seen one user who's very, very active posting about curling, and I was quite impressed to see some videos with over 100,000 views. And those are not 100,000 people that are following this one user, but those are probably kids opening up their phone, scrolling and seeing, this is a sport. And it was a video about a rock measurement. So I think that if we really push the marketing and start making the sport look fun and basically show what it can be to young people, we can get more young people involved.
I really agree with this. I think it's super important that we, as curlers, get out more on social media. I know that, for example, like the Swedish Curling Federation is quite good at it, but I think a lot of the local clubs, at least in Sweden, could be a lot better at reaching out to their communities. And also, as Jacob said before, with the diversity, I think it's, even though, I mean, curling is a predominantly white sport, like one thing that we can make maybe the kids relate to when we try to get them is that we are actually young. I mean, it's, even though we might not look kind of the same, we still got like the one thing in common, that we're both young, and that makes it a lot easier maybe for them to relate to something rather than as it can be, at least in my home club, like an older person who is super kind but is also, I don't know, 65 plus. That's kind of hard to relate to as a 10-year-old, I think.
Thank you. So we had one question coming in that I want to ask you, and then we're gonna start with like a wrap up. But we have, let's see, Darren McEwen wrote, any thoughts on academic support from curling related organizations? Do you find the process for applying for scholarships clear? Is awareness there, or are there things with curling scholarship that can be improved? Are scholarships even available to the international panelists on today's call? Anyone here who is applied for a scholarship that would like to answer this question?
I do got like kind of a scholarship. I don't, well, universities in Sweden is free, so it's, I don't know how it is in Canada, but it's yeah. But I've applied to kind of a elite university program where I get to have a certain of I get, for example, I get a free gym membership at my local gym club, and I am able to provide support if my school and my curling is crashing together. I'm able to get a bit of help, so that's super nice. But the thing with that is that I have to be considered an elite athlete, which is, I mean, that's might not be the case for everyone, and that might be if you feel that you are maybe not ready to, I don't know, to keep on with your elite curling and just want to play curling and study. I don't know how that works, but that's what I've done. So, and it's been great, yeah.
So, yeah, Abby.
In Canada, there are two scholarships that sort of stand out. There's the Sandra Smerler Foundation Scholarship and the For the Love of Curling Scholarship. Typically, those ones are awarded to young curlers who have had quite a bit of success at the national level in Canada or world level. So you don't see a lot of, as far as I know from experience, you don't see a lot of grassroots players getting scholarships. I guess it's to touch on Sofie's point, the elite cutoff. But as far as other scholarships, I'm not sure how many are out there aside from those two.
Is there anyone else who'd like to provide an answer to Darren's question? I'll take that as question answered. So now, just before we wrap up, I'd like to just ask, like, all of you, wrap up with the one question. We talked about this a little bit beforehand. So imagine that we are like 30 years in the future. You are now in your maybe early 50s. What have you learned from engaging as a young person in curling today that you will remember and take with you when you are an an adult curler or organizational leader within the sport. Tyler Powell, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I think the key thing to kind of remember, no matter what your age, is like you can never stop, you can never stop learning about like life or the sport you're playing or anything like that. I think I don't know. I think some people, when they, I don't know, some people are just naturally like this, but I feel like sometimes it can happen for some people as they get older, is they might not be as open to new ideas and as open to learning about what's around them. And I think the key thing is just being a student of like what's around you, and just continuing to learn, continuing to listen to what young people have to say, listen to, like look at the news and see what young people are doing, and just continue to be a student your whole life, I think, is the biggest change. Because I think, yeah, some people kind of get a little bit closed off, I think, as if they've been involved with something for maybe 30, 40 years, they might think, oh, this is the way it's always been done, this is the way it has to be done. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing.
Thank you. Tyler Smith.
I think for me, it would have to be sort of remembering the frustration and not having a say. So like we're getting to the point where there are a lot of, or there's a growing number of youth bodies that are able to have some sort of influence on decisions that are being made by the governing bodies in curling, and sort of remembering the fact that, this is a new thing, and there are always going to be youth like us who want to make an impact on curling, and sort of remembering what it was like to want to make that impact, and ensuring that that youth voice is maintained as we sort of grow older, and ensuring that the next generation of us has is able to have the same opportunities to have that, or greater opportunities really, to have that influencing voice on our sport.
Thank you. Jacob.
I think like what I'm gonna have with me a lot is I think curling has really taught me a growth mindset and how to like always look at stuff. And I hope like I will be able to give that way of thinking back, or be in a situation where that way of thinking is encouraged and appreciated. I'm hoping that going forward, like when I'm in a position in a club where I'm the old man at the board, that I can be encouraging, and that we can move past this narrative of young people being naive and just wanting to do what's best in the now and what's best for them, and kind of thinking that they might be narcissistic to some extent or egocentric. I feel like we're really in a time where we are moving past that and are starting to really appreciate voices and everyone's voices, because we realize that we all come from different perspectives, and it's so important to bring people, like everybody, to light. I mean, that's a double-edged sword in itself a bit, because I mean, having so many experiences and having so many voices can also make decision making difficult, and that's also an important part of it. But I think when you find that perfect balance point of just having a safe space where people feel free to ask questions, speak their minds, it might open up. Me asking a question in the future might make someone think in another way, or vice versa. And just really having a safe space where we're all on a level playing field, and where governing bodies and people that make decisions operate in a system that's so transparent that it's super evident for me to know how change is actually made.
Thank you. Sofie.
Yeah, well, I just want to stay curious, to be honest. Just as the other one said, just having that growth mindset and being able to I really like that, like being a student. I think that's super important to bring with me. That I'm staying curious and that I'm staying kind of grounded and still. I mean, I think a really fun part of being a youth is that you're kind of keeping that like anything isn't, like nothing is impossible. And I think I really want to keep that when I'm older, to just be able to keep on working for what I believe in, and don't be scared that it might be too hard or too I don't know, too difficult, or I don't want to feel like I don't want to do this. I want to stay curious and just be open-minded about it. So yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Abby, what are your takeaways?
Similar to what the others mentioned about being a sponge and learning from everybody, I know for me, even in this conversation we had today, I have many takeaways that I'm going to take with me, but also to adapt to the changing environment and the changing needs of those in the sport, and what each demographic needs to have fun and enjoy the sport as a whole and make it more inclusive in every aspect. But most importantly, listen to those around you and listen to everybody, because everybody has a different opinion, perspective, idea, and all of it is valuable.
Well, thank you. I think all of you have been absolutely fantastic. I'm thrilled that you all decided to give us a bit of your time this afternoon/evening. And yeah, I think see from the comments as well that I think people have really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm also really looking forward to you guys being the leadership of curling also when you're 50 and older. Thank you again so much, Sofie and Jacob. Good luck with your competition tomorrow, and the same goes for Abby, Tyler, and Tyler with the rest of your season. And I'll hopefully speak to you again at some point soon.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Together this forum.